Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mortal Kombat 1 video. With us of course, back in the swing of things with MK Law. Today, I wanted to do quite an undertaking, covering what has become of all the missing characters mentioned in the new established timeline, as this new era brings on a new wave of familiarity with significant differences from well-known characters, ones that have been changed and altered for this new generation. So naturally, it raises the question of, where exactly are the other characters in this universe? Well, for me to do this, I will be solely focusing on characters not featured on the roster, and this includes the cameo roster, because at least with the base roster, we do get to see them and what kind of becomes of them in-game, whereas the cameo roster themselves kind of function as more of a gameplay mechanic. Even so, some do actually feature and are seen present during the events of Mortal Kombat 1, whilst there are some who are pretty much entirely non-existent. So I hope that makes a bit of sense going forward. I will be using arcade ladder endings, intro dialogues, as well as the main story itself, as it's going to serve as a reference and way to gauge who exists in the current present. Also, worth noting that I do have it on very good word from a NetherRealm developer that mirror match intros aren't entirely canon, as they do largely dive into that of the more multiversal aspects of the story. Thus, I will be excluding any characters mentioned during these mirror matches. But before we do begin, as always, if you're enjoying these sort of lore dumps, please do give this video a thumbs up, as whilst there is a minor thing, it really does go a very long way here. And I mean, hell, if you made it this far, please do consider subscribing. Anywho, let's just jump right into things. Now, first character to touch on here, and actually the very first one alluded to through the betas, is the Emerald Countess Jade. Currently, very little is actually known of her in this timeline, only that she sits in a very high position within Outworld's royal court. Unfortunately, outside of the name drop, very is little to known of her here, as she's never brought up once during the story, so we simply don't know what became of her during the events of Mortal Kombat 1. And honestly, the same could actually be said of her former spouse, Kotal of the Oztec, briefly name-dropped during the Mortal Kombat tournament. It looks like Kotal and his people live in relative peace amongst the other races of Outworld, with Kotal himself presumably being the champion of the Oztec, as he is the one to represent them during the tournament. With that in mind, he is not actually physically present during any of this, only mentioned as one of the many to have fallen to the hand of Earthrealm's champion, Raiden. One of our next big returns is of course none other than the Dragon King Onaga, arguably the most foreshadowed figure for the next big installment. Yet, unlike that of the original canon, the Onaga we have here looks to be more of a feral beast, because in this era, instead of conquering the lands of Outworld, he would actually be defeated and imprisoned by Shao's ancestors, locked away to rot as a memory lost to time. It is in the aftermath of the story, however, where he would once again rise. With Shao desperate to crumble Melina's empire, he would seek to enslave Onaga beneath him, to use his untamed power to usher in a new age. But with all of this merely teased as a post-campaign stinger, we do not know just how much of this will take fruition in the next game. Moving along, we do have the iconic return of Hanzo Hasashi, the infamous and once legendary Hellspawn of the Shirai Ryu. In this timeline though, things could not be more different for Hanzo, as even his own title is held by Kuai Liang. Hanzo Hasashi here is instead an entirely new fresh face, one that has been recruited by Smoke, as prior to this, Hanzo was but a mere street urchin. His potential would very quickly be recognized by Smoke, who then brought him to the Shirai Ryu. Here, he would train alongside Kuai Liang, honing his craft and becoming a formidable force, as he would even train along Earthrealmers in order to chisel his wrath. The next two characters we have here is Argus and Delia, the Edenian gods of old, who are ever so loosely referenced by the Edenians. Mind you, it is in passing through an intro, but it's very clear that they do exist in the present. As for their importance to that of the realm itself, it is yet to be seen, as nothing documents them being very present or prominent. Not even their children are actually present here, as one of their previous half-children, Rain, is no longer a child of Argus, being stripped of his divinity by Liu Kang's hand. And the only times we hear of Taven, Dagon, as well as Blaze, is actually during mirror match dialogue. Thus, we don't know how canon their existence is right now, so I don't think that their returns are particularly very high. Turning our gaze towards that of the Order Realm, we learn that following Havoc's plot to flood Saido, in its waste, Hotaru would be one of the very lucky few who managed to survive and migrate over to Outworld, now under the protection of Empress Melina. The only tidbits we know of Hotaru is that prior to the flood, he was a royal Sidon guard, someone who enforced the tyrannical rule. But now, with his world laid to waste, he is robbed of both a future and a home. Now this is definitely a character I didn't expect to see again, and that is Kai. Entirely absent since the events of Armageddon, Kai makes his first appearance 17 years later as Master Kai. And it looks like the reboot has done him quite well, as he's an elder teacher within the Wuxi Academy, and is passing along his decades worth of knowledge to the next generation. Obviously, all in preparation for the next annual Mortal Kombat tournament. And since we are on the topic of the Shaolin, another character mentioned is the cousin of Lao, Kung Jin. Now, unlike others featured here, little is known of Jin during this era, as our only exposure to him has been his multiversal counterpart, one that is slain by Katana. In this current era though, he's only quickly mentioned in an intro between Lao and Kenshi, where Jin is apparently showing a keen interest in that of the Black Dragon clan, much to both of their displeasure. Now, a pair of characters that has only been mentioned in passing are the Shadow Sisters of Serena, and that is Kia and Jataka, having now been enslaved under the influence of Quan Chi. The trio would play a pivotal role in his schemes with Shang Tsung, but their time under his surface would be very short, as they would fall to ruin by one of their other sisters no less, Ashura. Seeking to free them from his grasp and snare, Ashura tries her best to break his hold on them, and sadly, it cannot be done. Thus, Ashura believes that the only release they can have is by perishing to a blade. So Kia and Jataka are currently confirmed dead in the new era. Another pretty big notable name that has been mentioned is the former Crimson Cyborg, Sector. In this new era, with the Cyber Initiative yet to go underway, Sector is one of the many loyalists within the Lin Kuei that continues to follow Bi-Han in the fall of the story. It's his keen mind which makes him such a valuable asset to Sub-Zero, as both seek to create a new age for the clan, one forged in steel, as Sector begins creating suits of armor, of course intended in this timeline to be their take on the Cyber Lin Kuei. Now here's a very recent, yet surprising name drop that I didn't expect to hear of, the fallen Elder God Shinnok. Whilst not at all present during the main game story, having presumably never been born due to Kronika's erasure, it does not prevent his amulet appearing in the present, wielded by General Shao in his siege against Sindel. It's upon his lost foe where it would be claimed by Liu Kang, but somehow the amulet would slip out of his grasp, falling into the hands of Quan Chi, as it is mentioned in an intro between the two, but of course never elaborated on how he achieved this. Outside of this though, it definitely doesn't look great for the God of Death, as I don't see him returning anytime soon. Now, another character that is briefly mentioned is the former queen of the Shogun, Shiva. in this timeline, very little is known about her, as she's not seen or particularly heard much of, being a very loose throwaway line of one of the many competitors that was defeated by Raiden. So outside of her participation in the tournament, we don't actually know what she gets up to for the rest of the story. Moving along, we do have some factions here, with first, and arguably the most popular clan of the franchise, the Black Dragons. Whilst none are named by person, we do know that they definitely exist in the present, being strongly detested by Liu Kang and referred to as such as scoundrels. And of course, with Kano currently sitting on the cameo roster, I highly doubt that much has changed in terms of leadership. Another name drop is actually the Chitin. The Vora's race seems to be thriving and well, still existing in the realm of Outworld. Even with that in mind though, it does look like they are held up in quite high disdain, as Reptile even says that he wishes no one to cross their paths. And in the fall of the game's main narrative, it does look like they have been enslaved under Shao's heel. No doubt another addition to his army, as he looks to wage war against Mileena. Another faction that is very briefly mentioned is that of the Nakanadas, Collector's race. Now, I will say none are actually seen or given a name. In fact, the most exposure we have to one is actually Collector in the Invasion mode. And we do know that that mode isn't actually canon. Thus, it is a mystery of whether or not Collector does exist in the current present. Now, I do have some honourable mentions here for characters that haven't been playable in previous Mortal Kombat, but at the very least are notable names dropped that are affiliated with pivotal characters. The first is the infamous King Gorbak, father of Goro and leader of the Quartan Kingdom. Gorbak has mostly been a background character ever since the Shogun were established. In fact, Gorbak's most notable appearances have strictly been limited to that of the comics, as he was most prevalent during the Malibu Saga, as well as the non-canon MKX line. Here, he does make a return, but is still sadly doomed to be a background character, referred to in passing, as it looks like he and the Shogun are on relatively good terms with Empress Mileena. The next character is actually one that has been name-dropped a handful of times, but has never been intrinsically important to the main games. Lover to fan favorite Kenshi and mother of Takeda. Although she perishes in the rebooted timeline, here she is alive and very well, having what I could only describe as a strained relationship with Kenshi, as the two have seemingly parted ways. Despite this though, Kenshi still holds on to the hope that they can eventually be reunited. Please do keep in mind that right now, Takeda is still not present on the roster, but with his imminent release, I suspect we will learn more about Suchin here. Our next and final character is Harumi, and this is definitely quite a controversial inclusion in the new era, as she's no longer the wife of Hanzo Hasashi. Instead, Harumi is a much older figure, having been raised in Japan and having ties to that of the Lin Kuei, being childhood friends of Bi-Han and Kuai Liang. Yet, it's in the aftermath of the story where she would be reunited with the two, as after the betrayal of Bi-Han, Kuai Liang would seek refuge with her in Japan, and it's together where they would form the Shirai Ryu, fighting back against Bi-Han's regime. Over the course of time, a romance does seem to flourish between the two, as they are scheduled to wed moving forward. With that said, this has been it for all of the characters that I could find that were referenced in Mortal Kombat 1. Now, please do remember that a lot of this could very quickly change, as there are more DLC characters on the horizon. But as of right now, I think this gives us a rough idea and scope of where the other characters are in the universe. So I do hope this has given you more clarity on some of your favorites. So, with that said, and everything accounted for here, who are you the most excited to see return that I've mentioned here. And of course, if I've missed anyone, please put them down in the comments below, as there are some obscure references that do exist outside the main canon that I purposely did not mention here. But for now everyone, that has been it for this video. Take care everyone, I'll see you all soon.